I guess my first question, your presentation, you talked about how we're not even really having a debate. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, we're not having a debate because it's not possible to discuss science when none of the participants know very much about science, and everything immediately say, "Oh, I'm not a scientist," and so therefore I don't know anything about the science. So now, if you're going to have a debate about the science, it really becomes a crash course in the science rather than a debate about the science, right?
Okay, over at Le Bourget at the COP21, they're telling us that the science is settled and everything is already known. There's 99 whatever percent certainty. In your experience, is that the case?
No, it's not. I mean, the problem is that we're talking about something that doesn't even have a coherent, physically based definition, which is climate, let alone that this thing we haven't defined is changing. And so we have a problem talking about a system that is changing on all scales of space and time. So you got little fluctuations and breezes running past your face, and then you got big in-between weather trends, gusts of wind, and then you get things going out over continents, and then you have things happening over centuries and millennia and eons and so forth. And all of this stuff is going on at the same time. So the question we have as a physical question is, what part of this stuff is not part of climate and what part is? And you can't just say, oh, well, I'll just take a bunch of stuff and average the hell out of it. I mean, that's basically the way in which we're working right now, because we're all working in the blind. We're just averaging things and saying, well, we see some structure there or some structure there. And you really have no idea whether you have something that can actually exist independently of the underlying structure, which is the hallmark of a specific physical phenomenon. And so, I mean, we have our day-to-day laboratory regime kind of experience. We know that there are atoms underneath that make the thing what it is, but we don't see the atoms and we don't participate in dealing with what the atoms are doing at any particular time. We just talk about heat and pressure and things like that. The same is true for climate. We don't have a definition that can stand on its own merits. We always have to work either up from the bottom up, from measuring or averaging over meteorological things, or we have to work geologically, but we don't actually have a bunch of equations that describe what climate actually is. So if you think that is settled under those circumstances, well, I don't think you're thinking very well. So.
Okay, a lot of the journalists are saying, well, the scientists said that there's consensus and that the science is settled. So what would you say to those journalists who are, at Le Bourget right now reporting on what's going on over there? What advice would you have for them?
Stop talking about people and start talking about things. Nature is about the things around us. It's about us too, I mean, our biology and so forth. But this inner world, our political world, and our social world, a world of fashion and so forth, is not nature. But every time I talk to journalists, they end up not talking about science. And so people like me who are in that business find that it's almost impossible to talk to anybody about this topic because we are never able to talk about science. I mean, we're always have to talk about the people, and that would be the big help. And if the journalists did that and they started asking questions about what was happening, what this guy thinks is happening, what that woman thinks is happening, and so forth, and they slowly develop a kind of insight over time. People pick that up by osmosis. Even if you're not a specialist, you pick it up. And eventually you can now articulate this in the press, and after a while people who read it are going to start to pick it up as well, and then the whole society advances, and we can have something resembling an understanding rather than emotional shouting matches and things like that, which of course we've seen a little bit of. I mean, I don't know what the people are doing at COP from a scientific point of view, so I don't think there's anything there.
Okay, you had a really interesting slide in your presentation, all these different things that were being blamed on climate change, extinction of redheads, and Loch Ness Monster, all these great things. Is there any scientific basis for any of these claims that are being made? Where are they getting this kind of stuff from?
Well, first of all, the science itself is in its infancy in many respects, because the climate as a field has been a very descriptive. Climatology was a very descriptive thing, and only in recent times we have something called climate science, and it's been kind of cobbled together to a large measure because of this need for some kind of policy position. And so all these different fields have been kind of bunched together in sort of one big package, and there's very few people who actually understand everything that's involved. So a lot of the science is actually not that great. I mean, there are some really good scientists in it, and there are some not so good scientists in it, and but it's a field that really should progress, but it doesn't. So in my talk, I will get to the point where I actually take these things that people are concerned with, these averages over the temperature field, and put it into a practical context, a real physical context. And it's pretty obvious that you can't have processes taking place with a single temperature. In physics, the things that happen when you have more than one temperature or more than one pressure. A single temperature won't tell you anything, right? So there's no physical way in which that can cause almost anything that's been attributed to climate. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't have human-caused climate change from glaciers and things like that. That could happen, and that can happen. But the actual ability to identify that that's been caused by this and so forth is far beyond human science as far as I estimate it. And what that image was a collage of a large number of these things that are generated in press stories constantly, and a lot of them are some of them are kind of, well, you can kind of understand why, but why redheads would be affected, or what happened to the Loch Ness Monster. But I mean, the number of these things is just enormous, and they fall like autumn leaves, and they just pile up and pile up. There are websites actually with links for each one of these stories, and some of them become dead after a while, but they just go on and on and on and on, because you can see the poor environmental reporters have to generate stories, and then somebody has some hyperbolic thing they want to say, and now suddenly that becomes the story, right? And so then that gets published, and then something else, some new crazy loony idea. But there's no physical basis for any of this stuff, and or no rigorous physical basis. I mean, hurricanes, I could see you could get into an argument about that, but it's all hand-waving. There's no solid physical mathematical structure that you can say, yes, we've proven the sense of proof that a mathematician or a theoretical physicist would be looking for.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to add? What do you think about what's going on here, the state of the science, anything at all that you want to add?
Well, the message I have for people, and I'm talking, there was some people who were talking about, what does a regular person make of all of this stuff. The important thing is that if you want to have a democratic society, people have to make intelligent, informed decisions, and that, I'm afraid, also includes decisions about science policy. So there has to be a kind of general improvement in the scientific understanding and insight. There has to be less acrimony about not letting people express views on this stuff, and hopefully by osmosis the standards will improve, but that can only happen if people would try to resist being afraid. And that's one of the biggest problems. There's a lot of fear, because if apocalypse is a very fearful, fear-making thing. And but I think if people are a little disciplined, and they think a little bit, and they ask common sense questions about a lot of things, you'll find that the story will open up in a way that you'll be able to relate to, and things you don't understand, just ask people about them, and then slowly your understanding will improve. But with what we have now, where we're constantly talking about these kinds of cliches, which are mostly incorrect, or false or defective, we're going to be in this constant cycle of confusion and absurdity, and it's all going to be about redheads and the Loch Ness Monster, right? And then we're going to have these ridiculous annual events where huge amounts of money are expended for really nothing useful or substantive.